On 23rd September 1999, at approximately 900 hours, members of the 82nd Signal Battalion were notified of a possible deployment to a small island just north of Australia called East Timor. East Timor was a Portuguese colony since the 16th century. In the late 1970s, Portugal had a socialist government, and this socialist government decided not to have any more colonies, and East Timor became independent. Not long after their independence, the U.S. ally in the Cold War, Indonesia, attacked East Timor, an Islamic state, and took it over and annexed it as part of their own country. The Catholic nation of East Timor would not accept the rule of Indonesia, and an insurgency began. Finally, in 1999, Indonesia allowed East Timor to have a plebiscite whether to become independent or not. After East Timor decided to become independent, Islamic militias began to attack the capital Dili and burn it. On the early morning of August 28, 1999, militia forces stormed the University of East Timor and began systematically to beat and arrest students at the university. After about an hour of a brutal assault on the students at the university, the militia began to set fire to the university. Indonesia local authorities did nothing to intervene in the brutal struggle. Those students who sustained mortal wounds were put on the back of a lorry truck and taken to an undisclosed location. Australia decided to lead the operation in East Timor. Besides Australians' goodwill, they have a multi-billion-dollar oil deal with the newly formed government of East Timor, the second newest government besides South Sudan in the world. This oil reserves are found off the East Timorian Sea next to East Timor. After establishing a task force comprised of various soldiers throughout Thunderbird Brigade, the task force worked about 2 weeks to prepare for deployment with 111 pieces of rolling stock, 127 soldiers, and several special circuit items to be deployed to the new nation of East Timor. Finally, on October 6, 1999, the first chalk left Guam, then to Darwin, Australia. The whole air movement phase took 1 week to complete. The operation comprised of 12 huge C-5 aircrafts and 1 C-17 aircraft to move the entire task force Thunderbird. I, Specialist Brannen, was selected to be the supply sergeant for the task force while in theater in East Timor, supported by my S-4 back in Darwin. On the 16th of October 1999, an advance party of 7 soldiers arrived at Dili, the capital of East Timor, to secure the University of East Timor's compound, which would be eventually the headquarters of Task Force Thunderbird. By the 18th of October 1999, aircraft deployed most of the main body of soldiers. 3 ships that contained the bulk of the task force equipment followed them. Specialist Brannen arrived with the main body of soldiers to set up supply operations to support American forces in East Timor. Due to the volatile situation on the island, the force protection was #1 priorities. Specialist Brannen issued soldiers live ammunition. Fighting positions in the concertina wire were set around the East Timor University compound. Mr. Brannen was armed with an M249 machine gun with 750 rounds of 5.56 NATO ammunition. There was much concern placed on our soldiers' personal hygiene. There was no electricity, running water, or any utilities in Dili. Makeshift showers were built and sinks were installed with drainage systems. On a daily basis, it was continually stressed that soldiers take malaria pills. After 3 days of deployment into the country, the focus shifted to ensure the soldiers' living quarters were clean and the rooms were structurally sound. The soldiers began to build carpentry works with the wood purchased from Darwin. To help clean up the university compound and dig drainage ditches to prepare for the monsoon season, the task force Thunderbird hired 10 locals, nationals, through the Interfet Workers program for $5 a day. The workers done an absolutely fantastic job in cleaning the university, and most of them were former students. Hopefully these students would go back to the university when our mission was completed, and we gave back the university to the government of East Timor. There was 5 women and 5 men that were working for us. One of the workers accidentally cut the main line to our satellite dish, which stopped communications for a while and internet access. We shared the compound with an Australian unit that was a map-making, a tropo unit. At first we ate with the Australians and other international forces in East Timor, but later the Navy quarantined the Australian food service, so we had to eat MREs. We had to eat MRE for 2 months during the deployment. My job as the unit supply specialist was to make sure that we had enough fresh food, so I'd go around to the Australian units and ask for food and trade with them so we could have fresh food like bread and fruit. To keep up the soldiers' morale, we were allowed to go to a marine transport ship or an amphibious ship for a day of little R&R. We started a bar in the chemistry lab after we took out the mercury, and the American and Australian soldiers could sit there. The Australian soldiers could drink, but American soldiers were not allowed to drink except for 2 days, in which we had to turn in our weapons to drink alcohol. The chaplain also took us to see the Big Jesus, much like all Portuguese colonies, that overlooked the harbor of East Timor, Dili. Finally, the task force came home on December 23rd. Mr. Brannen had the guide on outside the hatch of the C-5 as we transit the airport of Fort Huachuca, Arizona. Specialist Brannen received the Army Accommodation Medal for his service in East Timor. His achievement, too, said, Specialist Brannen consistently performed superbly as Task Force Thunderbird Supply Sergeant during Operation Stabilize. His expertise and meticulous attention to detail was instrumental in the successful logistical operations while supporting his soldiers in East Timor, Indonesia. He flawlessly assisted the PBO and S4 NCOIC in receiving supplies and equipment to support the entire task force. He helped deploy and redeployed over 540 tons of material for Operation Stabilize.